In the brutal summer of 1876, Apache War Chief Kaylor, a man who has never lost a battle, faces his greatest defeat, his newborn son dying in his arms. The mother is gone, lost to childbirth, and the baby refuses all nourishment. The only person who might save him? Elena Ward, a white widow, an enemy, a woman who just lost her husband and infant daughter in a massacre. When hatred collides with desperation, an impossible choice will change everything. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Apache camp sat in a hollow between two mesas, sheltered from the worst of the wind, but not from the heat. It was late summer, 1876, and the land had baked itself into something hard and unforgiving. Dust hung in the air like a veil, and the few scrub trees offered shade that felt more like mockery than relief. Inside the largest dwelling, a sturdy wickiup built from willow branches and animal hides, Chief Kaylor knelt beside a small bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. His son, 3 days old, dying. The baby's skin had taken on a grayish cast, his lips pale and cracked. He made small, weak sounds, barely cries, more like the mewling of something already half gone. Kaylor had seen death enough times to recognize it, on the battlefield, in the eyes of wounded men, in the still faces of the fallen. But this was different. This was his blood, his only child. The infant's mother, Kaylor's wife, Naira, had died bringing him into the world. The labor had gone on too long, the bleeding wouldn't stop, and by the time the baby finally came, she was already slipping away. She'd held the child once, whispered a name, Tarek, and then her eyes had gone distant and empty. 3 days. That's all Kaylor had been a father, and now it was ending. He reached down and touched the baby's cheek with one rough finger. The skin was hot and dry. Tarek turned his head weakly, mouth searching, but when Kaylor tried again to get him to take the goat's milk they'd prepared, the baby only gagged and turned away. "He will not drink," said a voice from the entrance. Kaylor didn't look up. He knew who it was. Rovan, his second in command, a man 10 years younger and twice as eager to prove himself. Rovan had been circling like a vulture since Naira's death, waiting to see if grief would make Kaylor weak. "I can see that," Kaylor said quietly. "The old women say he needs a mother's milk. Without it." Rovan let the sentence trail off, but the meaning was clear. Kaylor's jaw tightened. "There is no mother." "No," Rovan agreed. "Not among our people." Kaylor finally looked up. Rovan stood in the doorway, backlit by the harsh afternoon sun, his arms crossed over his chest. He was lean and scarred, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from stone with a dull blade. There was no sympathy in his expression, only calculation. "What are you saying?" Kaylor asked, though he already knew. "The captive," Rovan said. "The white woman. She had a child recently." Kaylor's hand stilled on the baby's chest. He knew exactly who Rovan meant. 3 weeks ago, they'd raided a small settler camp near the Gila River. It had been a quick, brutal affair, revenge for a cavalry ambush that had killed 2 of their warriors. Most of the settlers had died. A few had been taken. Among them, a young woman with dark blonde hair and hollow eyes. Elena Ward. That's what one of the dying men had called her before Rovan put a knife in his ribs. She'd been holding a baby when they found her, a girl, maybe 2 months old, but the child had been sick, fever, they thought, and had died within a day of being brought to camp. The woman had barely reacted. She'd just sat there in the dirt, staring at nothing, while they pried the small body from her arms. "She had milk," Rovan continued, "probably still does." Kaylor looked back down at his son. Tarek's breathing was shallow, irregular. He wouldn't last another day. Maybe not another night. "She is our enemy," Kaylor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "She is a resource," Rovan countered. "And your son is dying. You are chief. You do what is necessary." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a challenge. Rovan was watching him, weighing him, waiting to see if grief had made him too soft to lead. Kaylor stood slowly, his knees protesting. He was 34 years old, but he felt twice that. The years of fighting, of running, of watching his people shrink and scatter while the whites took more and more land, it had worn him down to something sharp and tired. "Bring her," he said. Rovan's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. Or contempt. Hard to say. He turned and disappeared into the sunlight. Kaylor looked down at Tarek one more time. The baby's eyes were closed, his tiny fists clenched. Kaylor reached out and smoothed one hand over the soft dark hair on his son's head. "Forgive me," he whispered in Apache. Then he stepped outside. The camp was small, maybe 40 people in total, most of them women, children, and old men. The warriors who remained were either too young or too stubborn to accept reservation life. Kaylor's band was one of the last holdouts, clinging to the old ways even as the world closed in around them. The captives were kept on the eastern edge of the camp, near a cluster of low rocks that offered some shelter from the wind. There were 4 of them, 2 Mexican men, a teenaged boy, and the white woman. They were bound loosely, allowed to move around but not to leave. Escape wasn't really an option out here. The desert would kill them faster than any warrior. Elena Ward sat apart from the others, her back against a sun-bleached boulder. She wore a torn gray dress that had once been modest and practical. Now it was stained with dust and blood. Some of it hers, most of it not. Her dark blonde hair hung loose around her face, tangled and dull. She stared at the ground in front of her, unmoving. Rovan approached her first, barking something in Apache. She didn't respond, didn't even look up. He grabbed her by the arm and hauled her to her feet. She stumbled, caught herself, and finally raised her eyes. They were blue, pale, washed-out blue, like the sky in winter, and utterly empty. Kaylor stopped a few paces away. Up close, he could see the bruises on her wrists where the ropes had chafed, the cut on her lower lip that was only just starting to heal. She was thin, probably hadn't been eating much. But she was alive. That was more than could be said for most of the people in that settler camp. "You speak English?" Kaylor asked. His English was rough, accented, but functional. He'd learned it from traders, missionaries, soldiers, enough to get by. She looked at him, but didn't answer. "Your baby," Kaylor said. "You had milk. For baby." Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or anger. Hard to tell. "She's dead," Elena said. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it in days. "You killed her." "Sickness killed her," Kaylor said flatly. "Not us." "You took her from her father," Elena shot back, and now there was heat in her voice, a spark of something that hadn't been there a moment ago. "You burned our home. You killed my husband. Your people killed mine," Kaylor interrupted. "Many times. Many years." Elena's mouth snapped shut. She glared at him, her jaw tight, but she didn't argue. Kaylor gestured toward the wickiup behind him. "I have son. 3 days old. Mother dead. He will not eat, will not drink. He is dying." Elena's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "Good," she said. Rovan stepped forward, his hand moving toward the knife at his belt, but Kaylor raised a hand to stop him. "You want him to die," Kaylor said. It wasn't a question. "I want all of you to suffer," Elena said, and her voice was steady now, cold. "The way I'm suffering, the way my daughter suffered." Kaylor studied her for a long moment. He saw the grief in her eyes, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. She was a woman who had lost everything. He understood that. He was living it. "You feed him," Kaylor said. "You keep him alive. I let you live." Elena laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You're going to kill me anyway. Why would I help you?" "Maybe," Kaylor admitted. "Maybe not. But if my son dies, you die. Soon. Painful." He let the words hang in the air between them, heavy and cold. "You help him live. You live. Maybe longer. Maybe better." It wasn't mercy. It was a transaction, and they both knew it. Elena's gaze dropped to the ground. For a long time, she said nothing. Kaylor could see her hands trembling, could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Finally, she looked up. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I can't watch another baby die." Kaylor nodded. That was enough. Elena followed Kaylor into the wickiup, her steps slow and reluctant. Rovan stayed outside, arms crossed, watching her like she might bolt at any second. Inside, the air was stifling. The baby lay where Kylor had left him, wrapped in deerskin, making those weak rattling sounds that meant his time was running out. Elena stopped just inside the entrance, staring down at the child. Her face was unreadable. "Sit," Kylor said, gesturing to a woven mat near the baby. She didn't move. "Sit," he repeated, more firmly this time. Slowly, Elena lowered herself to the ground. Her hands were shaking. She reached out toward the baby, hesitated, then pulled back. She stopped, swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can." "You can," Kylor said. There was no gentleness in his voice, just certainty. Elena closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then carefully, she picked up the baby. Tarek stirred in her arms, letting out a thin, reedy cry. She flinched, her whole body going rigid, and for a second Kylor thought she might drop him, but she didn't. She held him against her chest, one hand cradling his head, and after a moment she shifted her dress and brought him to her breast. Kylor looked away, giving her what privacy he could in the small space. For a long time there was only silence. And then, barely audible, the sound of the baby suckling. Elena let out a shaky breath, somewhere between a sob and a sigh. Tears ran down her face, dripping onto the deerskin blanket, but she didn't make a sound. Kylor watched from the corner of his eye. The baby was drinking, weak at first, but steadier with each passing moment. Color was already starting to return to his lips. He was going to live. Kylor felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't realized was wound so tight. Relief, maybe, or just the absence of despair. He glanced at Elena. She was staring down at Tarek, her face pale and streaked with tears, her expression caught somewhere between heartbreak and something else, something softer. "Thank you," Kylor said quietly. Elena didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge the words, but her grip on the baby tightened just a little, and she kept feeding him. "Bantim." Over the next few days, a fragile routine took shape. Elena was moved from the edge of the camp to a smaller wickiup closer to Kylor's. She wasn't a prisoner anymore, not exactly, but she wasn't free either. She was given better food, cleaner water, a blanket that wasn't full of holes. In exchange, she fed Tarek. At first, she barely spoke. She would come when called, nurse the baby in silence, and then retreat back to her shelter. She moved through the camp like a ghost, her eyes always distant, her face carefully blank. The other captives watched her warily. The two Mexican men muttered to each other in Spanish, casting dark looks in her direction. The boy, a scrawny kid of maybe 14, just stared. None of them understood why she was being treated differently, and Elena didn't bother to explain. Kylor kept his distance for the most part. He watched from afar as she fed his son, making sure Tarek was gaining weight, getting stronger. The baby was thriving now. His skin had lost that grayish tint. His cries were louder and more insistent. He was going to survive. But Kylor found himself watching Elena, too. The way she held Tarek so carefully, like he might shatter. The way she closed her eyes when she fed him, as if she were somewhere else entirely. The way she flinched whenever Rovan came near. She hated them. That much was obvious. But she was keeping his son alive, and for that Kylor owed her something. He just didn't know what. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mesa and the air finally started to cool, Kylor approached her shelter. She was sitting outside, Tarek asleep in her arms, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "He is strong now," Kylor said in English. Elena didn't look at him. "Yes, because of you." She said nothing. Kylor crouched down a few feet away, his knees creaking. "You have name, Elena." "I know my name," she said flatly. "I am Kylor." "I know who you are." He nodded slowly. This was harder than he'd expected. Talking to enemies was easy. You threatened, you negotiated, you fought. But this wasn't that. This was something else. "Why you help him?" Kylor asked. "You say you want us to suffer." Elena finally looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "I do." "But you feed my son." "I told you," she said quietly. "I can't watch another baby die, even yours." Kylor studied her face, looking for the lie, the trick. But there was none. Just grief, raw and endless. "Your daughter," he said carefully. "What was her name?" Elena's jaw tightened. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer, then barely above a whisper, "Rose." Kaylor nodded. "Rose," he repeated, testing the word. It sounded strange in his mouth, soft and foreign. Elena's hands tightened around Tarek, and she looked away again. "Don't," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't say her name." Kaylor stood, feeling the weight of her grief like a stone in his chest. He understood it. He'd carried it himself since Naira died, but understanding didn't make it easier. Didn't make any of this easier. "I'm sorry," he said, "for your loss." Elena let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "No, you're not." "I am," Kaylor insisted. "I am father now. I know what it is to lose, to fear losing." She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw something other than hatred in her eyes. Not forgiveness, not even understanding, but maybe recognition, the acknowledgement that they were both drowning in the same dark water. "Your people killed my family," Elena said, her voice trembling. "Your people took everything from me." "And your people took everything from mine," Kaylor replied. "Many times, many years. We are even. We'll never be even," Elena whispered. Kaylor didn't argue. She was probably right. He turned to leave, but then paused. "You are safe here," he said. "As long as you care for my son. No one will hurt you." "And when he doesn't need me anymore?" Elena asked. Kaylor didn't have an answer for that, so he just walked away. The days stretched into a week, then two. Tarek grew stronger, more alert. He started to recognize Elena, would calm when she picked him up, would fuss when she handed him back to Kaylor. The baby didn't know she was supposed to be the enemy. He just knew she fed him, held him, kept him safe. Elena, for her part, remained distant, but Kaylor noticed small changes. She ate more, spoke a little more freely with the old women who brought her food and water. She even smiled once, barely, just a ghost of a thing, when Tarek grabbed her finger and wouldn't let go. But she never smiled at Kaylor. Rovan noticed the changes too, and he didn't like them. "She's getting comfortable," he said one afternoon, standing outside Kaylor's wickiup. "Too comfortable." "She is caring for my son," Kaylor replied, not looking up from the bough he was restringing. "That is her purpose." "Her purpose," Rovan said slowly, "was to keep the baby alive until he could take other food. He is strong now. He does not need her anymore." Kaylor's hands stilled. Rovan was right, technically. Tarek was thriving. He could probably be weaned onto goat's milk now, or mashed food. He didn't need Elena's milk anymore, but he needed her. Kaylor could see it in the way the baby reached for her, the way he settled in her arms. And maybe Kaylor needed her too. Not for the baby, for something else, something he didn't have words for yet. "She stays," Kaylor said firmly. Rovan's expression darkened. "The men are talking. They say you are too close to her, that you are forgetting who she is." "I forget nothing," Kaylor said, his voice cold. "And the men will do as I say." "For now," Rovan said quietly. "But how long, Kaylor? How long before they stop listening?" It was a threat, thinly veiled, but a threat nonetheless. Kaylor stood, setting the bow aside, and faced Rovan directly. He was taller, broader, and Rovan, for all his ambition, took a step back. "You question me?" Kaylor asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I question your judgment," Rovan said, holding his ground. "The white woman is poison. The longer she stays, the weaker you look." "Then they are fools," Kaylor said. "Strength is not killing everything that frightens you. Strength is knowing when to fight and when to hold back." "Pretty words," Rovan said, "but words do not win wars." "Neither does stupidity," Kaylor shot back. "She is useful. She stays. That is final." Rovan stared at him for a long moment, his jaw working, his hands clenched into fists. Then, without another word, he turned and stalked away. Kaylor watched him go, unease settling in his gut. Rovan was ambitious, restless, and ambition in a man like that was dangerous. Kaylor would have to watch him, closely, but for now, he had other concerns. That night, Kaylor found Elena sitting outside her shelter again, Tarek asleep against her shoulder. The camp was quiet, most people already asleep. A few fires still burned, casting flickering shadows across the ground. He sleeps well with you, Kaylor said, announcing his presence. Elena glanced up, then back down at the baby. He's a good baby. He is my son, Kaylor said, a hint of pride in his voice. Of course he is good. Elena almost smiled. Almost. Kaylor sat down across from her, the fire between them. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. Why do you come here? Elena asked finally. Every night you come. Why? Kaylor considered the question. Why did he come? He could have sent one of the old women to check on Tarek, could have stayed away entirely, but he didn't. I want to know my son, he said. And you know him now, better than I do. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in days. You're afraid, she said softly. You're afraid you'll lose him. Kaylor didn't deny it. I have lost much. I cannot lose him too. Then you understand, Elena said, and there was an edge to her voice now, sharp and cutting. You understand what it's like, to lose everything. Yes, Kaylor said simply. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Then why did you do it? Why did your people attack us? We weren't soldiers. We were just trying to survive. So were we, Kaylor said. Your people push us from our land, kill our families, burn our homes. We fight back. That is survival too. So it never ends, Elena said bitterly. You kill us, we kill you, over and over. Maybe, Kaylor said. Or maybe it can be different. Elena frowned. What do you mean? Kaylor looked down at Tarek, sleeping peacefully in her arms. You are enemy. I am enemy, but we both keep him alive, together. Maybe that is something. That's not peace, Elena said. That's just necessity. All peace starts with necessity, Kaylor replied. Then maybe it becomes something more. Elena stared at him, and he could see the conflict in her eyes, the hatred warring with exhaustion, the grief wrestling with something that might have been hope, or maybe just the absence of despair. I don't forgive you, she said finally, for what your people did, for what you did. I do not ask forgiveness, Kaylor said. I ask only that you stay. For him. Elena looked down at Tarek, her expression softening. She brushed a hand gently over his dark hair. For him, she whispered, not for you. Kaylor nodded. That was enough. For now. As he stood to leave, Elena spoke again. Kaylor, he turned back. If I stay, she said slowly, if I keep doing this, what happens when he doesn't need me anymore? It was the same question she'd asked before, and this time Kaylor had an answer. Then you choose, he said. You stay or you go, free. Elena's eyes widened slightly. You'd let me leave? If that is what you want, Kaylor said. But I think, maybe you do not know what you want yet. Maybe I do not know either. So we wait, we see. He didn't wait for her response. He just walked back to his own shelter, leaving her sitting there in the firelight, Tarek asleep in her arms, and the future, uncertain and fragile, stretching out before them both. Imnabd. The days continued to pass, and slowly, so slowly that neither of them really noticed at first, things began to shift. Elena started spending more time outside her shelter. She would sit with some of the older women, watching them work, occasionally helping with small tasks. She didn't speak much, but she listened, and the women, wary at first, began to accept her presence. Tarek, meanwhile, was growing fast. At 6 weeks old, he was alert and active, his dark eyes tracking movement, his tiny hands grasping at anything within reach. He smiled now, real, gummy smiles that lit up his whole face. And most of those smiles were for Elena. Kaylor watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. His son loved this woman, trusted her, needed her, and Kaylor was just the man who came to check on them. One afternoon, he found Elena sitting in the shade, Tarek on a blanket beside her, kicking his legs and making happy, burbling sounds. She was talking to him, soft, quiet words in English that Kaylor couldn't quite make out. He likes your voice, Kaylor said, approaching slowly. Elena looked up, startled. He likes anyone who pays attention to him. No, Kaylor said, crouching down beside them. He likes you. Elena's expression softened as she looked at the baby. He's easy to like. Kaylor reached out and let Tarek grab his finger. The baby's grip was surprisingly strong. He will be a warrior, Kaylor said with pride. Strong, brave. Or maybe he'll be something else, Elena said quietly. Maybe he'll be the kind of man who doesn't have to fight all the time. Kaylor frowned. The world does not allow that, not for our people. Maybe it should, Elena said, and there was a fierceness in her voice now. Maybe the world needs to change. Kaylor studied her face. You think the world will change because we want it to? No, Elena admitted. But maybe it changes because we refuse to keep doing the same things over and over. Maybe it changes because people like us decide to try something different. People like us, Kaylor repeated. Enemy and enemy. Or, Elena said, meeting his eyes, two people who have both lost too much to keep hating. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Kaylor felt something shift in his chest, a loosening, a softening. He didn't have a name for it, didn't know if he wanted one, but he knew this. Elena Ward was no longer just the white woman. She was the woman who had saved his son, the woman who sat with him in the firelight and spoke of changing the world, the woman who made Tarek smile. She was becoming something more, and that terrified him more than any battle ever had. But fear, Kaylor had learned long ago, was not something you could outrun. You could only face it or let it consume you. The trouble started 3 days later, just after dawn. Kaylor was checking on the horses when Rovan approached, his face tight with something that looked like barely contained anger. We need to talk, Rovan said, his voice low. Kaylor didn't look up from the mare he was inspecting. Her front leg had been favoring slightly, and he was checking for stones. So, talk. Not here, Rovan said, glancing around. Away from the others. Kaylor straightened, reading the tension in Rovan's shoulders, the way his hand kept drifting toward his knife. This wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. They walked to the edge of camp, past the last of the shelters, to where the land opened up into scrub and rock. The sun was already hot, promising another brutal day. Say what you came to say, Kaylor said, crossing his arms. Rovan turned on him, his eyes hard. The men are unhappy. They see what's happening. What's happening? Kaylor asked, though he knew exactly what Rovan meant. You and the white woman, Rovan spat. You spend every evening with her. You bring her food. You talk to her like she's one of us. She feeds my son, Kaylor said evenly. She deserves respect for that. She's a captive, Rovan shot back. An enemy. And you're treating her like something more. Like a person, Kaylor said coldly. I'm treating her like a person. Rovan's jaw clenched. You're making us look weak. The other captives see it. The warriors see it. Even the women are starting to whisper. Let them whisper, Kaylor said. I am still chief. What I do is not for them to question. You won't be chief for long if you keep this up, Rovan said, and there it was. The threat laid bare between them. Kaylor took a step forward, closing the distance. He was taller than Rovan, broader, and he used every inch of it. You think you can lead better than me? Rovan didn't back down. I think you've forgotten what it means to lead. You've gone soft. First your wife dies, and you can barely function. Now this white woman has you so twisted up, you can't see straight. The words hit harder than Kaylor expected. He felt rage flare hot and sharp in his chest. Careful, Rovan. Or what? Rovan challenged. You'll kill me? You haven't killed anyone in weeks, too busy playing nursemaid to a white woman and her baby. Kaylor's fist caught him in the jaw before he could finish. Rovan stumbled back, blood spraying from his split lip, and then came up swinging. His punch glanced off Kaylor's shoulder, and then they were grappling, all pretense of civility gone. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dust. Rovan got an elbow into Kaylor's ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Kaylor responded with a knee to Rovan's gut, then shoved him off and scrambled to his feet. Rovan was up just as fast, circling, wiping blood from his mouth. See? You still have some fight in you. Good. You're going to need it. This is finished, Kaylor growled. Stand down. It's not finished, Rovan said. Not until you prove you're still worthy to lead. Not until you send that woman away or put a blade in her. Show the men you haven't forgotten who we are." "I know exactly who we are," Kaylor said. "We are survivors. We do what we must to live." "We are warriors," Ravon corrected. "And warriors don't keep their enemies close. They destroy them." Kaylor felt the weight of those words, felt the eyes of the camp on them, even though they were alone. This wasn't just about Elena anymore. This was about leadership, about tradition, about the old ways clashing with something new and uncertain. "I will not kill her," Kaylor said firmly. "And I will not send her away. Not while my son needs her." "Your son is strong now," Ravon said. "He doesn't need her. You're just making excuses." "Maybe," Kaylor admitted. "But those are my excuses to make. I am chief." "For now," Ravon said again, and then he turned and walked away, leaving Kaylor standing alone in the dust, his hands still trembling with rage. Kaylor watched him go, unease settling deep in his bones. Ravon was right about one thing. The men were watching. And if they lost faith in him, if they started to believe he'd gone soft, it wouldn't matter how many battles he'd won in the past. They'd find a new leader. And Ravon was more than ready to step into that role. Kaylor returned to camp to find Elena sitting outside her shelter with Tarek. The baby was awake, gurgling happily as she made faces at him. She looked up when Kaylor approached, and her smile faded. "What happened to your face?" she asked. Kaylor touched his cheekbone, felt the tender spot where Ravon's fist had connected. It would bruise. "Nothing." "That doesn't look like nothing," Elena said, her eyes narrowing. "It is handled," Kaylor said curtly. "How is Tarek?" Elena studied him for a moment longer, clearly not buying his deflection, but she let it drop. "He's good. Happy. He ate well this morning." Kaylor crouched down beside them, reaching out to touch his son's cheek. Tarek turned toward him, eyes bright, and made a happy sound. Something in Kaylor's chest loosened slightly. "He grows strong," Kaylor said. "He does," Elena agreed. Then more quietly, "I heard shouting earlier." So she'd heard the fight, or at least the aftermath. Kaylor shouldn't have been surprised. Sound carried in the camp, and people talked. "Ravon," Kaylor said simply. "What did he want?" Kaylor hesitated. He could lie, could brush it off, but something made him tell the truth. "He wants me to send you away, or kill you." Elena went very still. Tarek, oblivious, continued to babble and wave his tiny fists. "And what do you want?" Elena asked, her voice carefully neutral. Kaylor looked at her. Really looked at her. She was thinner than when she'd first arrived, her face sharper, more angular. But there was color in her cheeks now, life in her eyes. She wasn't the hollow ghost who'd sat in the dirt and watched her daughter die. She was something else. Someone else. "I want my son to grow up," Kaylor said. "I want him to be strong and healthy. And right now you are part of that, so you stay." "Even if it costs you?" Elena pressed. "Even if your people turn against you?" "They will not turn," Kaylor said, with more confidence than he felt. "They follow me because I keep them alive. That has not changed." Elena looked down at Tarek, her expression troubled. "I'm causing problems for you." "You are causing Ravon problems," Kaylor corrected. "That is different." "Is it?" Elena asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I'm a liability, and liabilities get people killed." She wasn't wrong. Kaylor knew that. But he also knew that sending her away, or worse, would solve nothing. It would just prove Ravon right. Prove that Kaylor was willing to sacrifice anything to hold on to power. And he'd spent enough years sacrificing, enough years losing things. "You are not leaving," Kaylor said firmly. "Not yet." Elena met his eyes, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. There was something fragile building between them, something neither of them had words for. It wasn't trust, not quite, but it wasn't hatred anymore either. "Okay," Elena said finally, "but if this gets bad, if they come for me, I'm not going to just sit here and let it happen." "It will not come to that," Kaylor said. "You don't know that," Elena replied. She was right. He didn't. Over the next several days, the tension in the camp grew. Kaylor could feel it like a storm building on the horizon, dark, heavy, inevitable. The warriors watched him with wary eyes. Conversations stopped when he approached. Even the women seemed uneasy, whispering among themselves. Rovan, for his part, kept his distance. But Kalor could see him working, talking to the younger men, planting seeds of doubt. It was subtle, careful. Rovan was smart enough not to openly challenge him again. Not yet. But it was coming. Kalor could feel it. Elena noticed too. She started staying closer to her shelter, venturing out only when necessary. The easy progress she'd made with the older women evaporated. Now they watched her with suspicion, their expressions closed. One evening, as Kalor brought her food, dried meat and some kind of root vegetable mash that one of the women had prepared, she looked up at him with worried eyes. "Something's changed," she said. "People are looking at me differently." Kalor set the food down beside her. "Rovan is stirring trouble, turning them against you." "Against me?" Elena asked. "Or against you?" "Both," Kalor admitted. "Lord." Elena pulled Tarek closer, her arms tightening protectively around him. "Maybe I should go, just leave, disappear." "You would not survive," Kalor said bluntly. "The desert would kill you in 2 days." "Then maybe that's better than waiting for one of your warriors to do it," Elena said, and there was real fear in her voice now. Kalor sat down across from her, the fire crackling between them. "I will not let them hurt you." "You might not have a choice," Elena said. "If they decide you're unfit to lead, if they choose Rovan instead, what happens to me then?" Kalor didn't have an answer, because she was right. If it came down to a choice between his leadership and her safety, the outcome was already decided. A chief who couldn't command his people was no chief at all. "It will not come to that," Kalor said, but the words felt hollow even to him. Elena looked at him for a long moment, then down at Tarek, who was falling asleep against her chest. "You care about him," she said softly. "Your son. I can see it. You'd do anything to protect him." "Yes," Kalor said simply. "Then you understand," Elena said, and her voice broke slightly. "You understand why I have to protect myself, why I can't just trust that everything will be okay." "I understand," Kalor said, and he did. She was a woman alone in enemy territory, with no one to rely on but herself. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but something in him wanted her to trust him anyway, wanted to be worthy of that trust. "I will find a way," Kalor said, "to keep you safe, to keep all of this from falling apart." "How?" Elena asked. Kalor didn't know, but he would figure it out. He had to. The breaking point came a week later, on a morning that started like any other. Kalor was speaking with one of the scouts, a young man named Dakota, who'd been watching the trails for cavalry patrols, when shouting erupted from the center of camp. He turned and ran, Dakota at his heels, and found a crowd gathered near the fire pit. In the center of the circle stood Rovan, his hand wrapped around Elena's arm, dragging her forward. Tarek was crying, still clutched in her arms, and Elena was fighting, trying to pull free, but Rovan's grip was iron. "Let her go," Kalor said, his voice cutting through the noise. Rovan turned to him, his expression triumphant. "I found her trying to escape, sneaking toward the horses." "That's a lie," Elena gasped, still struggling. I was walking with the baby," Rovan interrupted. "In the middle of the night, moving toward the edge of camp. What else would you call that?" Kalor looked at Elena. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Is this true?" "I couldn't sleep," Elena said desperately. I needed air. I wasn't running." "She lies," Rovan said. "She was going to steal the child and run." The crowd murmured, voices rising. Some of the warriors stepped closer, hands moving to weapons. Kalor could feel the mood shifting, darkening. "I wasn't," Elena said, and now there were tears in her eyes. "Kalor, please, I wasn't." "Enough," Kalor said, his voice sharp. "Rovan, release her." "No," Rovan said, and the single word hung in the air like a challenge. The crowd went silent. Kalor's hand moved to the knife at his belt. "I gave you an order." "And I'm refusing it," Rovan said calmly. "This woman is a threat. She's been a threat from the beginning, and you've been too blind or too weak to see it." "Careful," Kalor warned. "The men agree with me," Rovan continued, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "They've been talking. They're tired of watching you coddle this white woman while our people suffer. They're tired of a chief who puts an enemy above his own warriors. Is that what they say? Kalor asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Or is that what you've been telling them to say? Rovan smiled, cold, predatory. Does it matter? The result is the same. They've lost faith in you, Kalor, and when a chief loses the faith of his people, he loses the right to lead. Kalor scanned the crowd. Some of the warriors met his eyes, their expressions hard. Others looked away, but none of them spoke up in his defense. His heart sank. Rovan had been more effective than he'd thought. So what do you want? Kalor asked. You want to lead? Is that it? I want what's best for our people, Rovan said, and that means getting rid of her. He jerked Elena forward, and she stumbled, barely keeping her grip on Tarek. She cares for my son, Kalor said. That makes her valuable. Your son is strong enough now, Rovan countered. He doesn't need her anymore. And keeping her here is a risk we can't afford. What happens when the cavalry comes looking for her? What happens when they track her here and find us? It was a legitimate concern. One Kalor had thought about himself. But the answer wasn't to kill Elena. The answer was to be smarter, more careful. We handle it, Kalor said. We've handled worse. Not with you leading, Rovan said. Not anymore. And there it was, the real challenge. Not about Elena, about power. Kalor stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You think you can do better? I know I can, Rovan said. Then prove it, Kalor said. Challenge me, properly. Not like this. Rovan's smile widened. Gladly. The crowd erupted in noise, some cheering, some protesting. Kalor heard it all like distant thunder, his focus narrowing to Rovan and the fight that was now inevitable. Tomorrow, Kalor said. At dawn, we settle this the old way. Agreed, Rovan said. He released Elena, shoving her back. She stumbled, catching herself, and immediately moved to the edge of the circle, clutching Tarek tightly. Kalor didn't look at her. Couldn't. If he did, he'd see the fear in her eyes, and that would break something in him he couldn't afford to lose right now. Instead, he turned and walked away, the crowd parting to let him through. That night, Kalor sat alone in his wickiup, sharpening his knife. The repetitive motion was soothing, familiar. He'd done this 100 times before battles, before raids, but this felt different. This was personal. Footsteps approached, and he looked up to find Elena standing in the entrance, Tarek asleep in her arms. You shouldn't be here, Kalor said. I know, Elena said, but I needed to talk to you. Kalor set the knife aside and gestured for her to sit. She did, carefully lowering herself to the ground, adjusting Tarek so he wouldn't wake. I'm sorry, Elena said quietly. I didn't mean to cause this. You did not cause it, Kalor said. Rovan did. He has been looking for an excuse to challenge me. You just gave him one. So it's my fault, Elena said bitterly. No, Kalor said firmly. It is his fault, and mine, for not dealing with him sooner. Elena looked at him, her eyes searching his face. You're going to fight him? Yes. And if you lose? Kalor didn't answer immediately. If he lost, he'd be dead. And Elena would be at Rovan's mercy, which meant she'd be dead too, or worse. I will not lose, Kalor said. You can't know that, Elena said, and her voice cracked. He's younger, faster, and he's angry. Anger makes people dangerous. So does love, Kalor said, before he could stop himself. Elena froze. What? Kalor looked at her, at this woman who had saved his son, who had somehow become part of his life in ways he hadn't anticipated, and realized the truth of his own words. He cared about her, not just because she fed Tarek, not just because she was useful, but because of who she was, what she represented, the possibility of something different, something better. I fight for my son, Kalor said carefully, and for you. That is enough. Elena's eyes filled with tears. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything, Kalor said. Without you, Tarek would be dead. Without you, I would be lost. You barely know me, Elena whispered. I know enough, Kalor said. I know you are strong, brave. I know you have suffered and survived. I know you care for my son as if he were your own. That is enough. Elena wiped at her eyes, blinking hard. If you die tomorrow— I will not die, Kaylor interrupted. But if you do, Elena pressed, what happens to Tarek? Kaylor hadn't thought that far ahead, but the question hung heavy between them. If I fall, Kaylor said slowly, you take him, you run, you find a way to survive. They won't let me, Elena said. Rovan will kill me the moment you're gone. Then you fight, Kaylor said. You do whatever you must to protect him. Promise me. Elena looked down at Tarek, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger swirling around him. I promise, she whispered. Kaylor reached out and placed his hand over hers where it rested on Tarek's back. The contact was brief but electric. Elena looked up, startled, and for a moment their eyes locked. I will not lose, Kaylor said again, and this time it wasn't just confidence, it was a vow. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They sat like that for a long time, the silence between them heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Elena stood, cradling Tarek carefully. I should go, she said. Stay, Kaylor said, the word escaping before he could think better of it. Elena hesitated, looking at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Just stay, Kaylor said again, softer this time. I do not want to be alone tonight. Elena's expression shifted, surprise, then understanding, then something softer. She sat back down, settling against the far wall with Tarek nestled against her. Kaylor lay down on his own mat, watching the shadows flicker across the ceiling. He could hear Elena's breathing, slow and steady, and the tiny sounds Tarek made in his sleep. It wasn't comfort, exactly, but it was something. And tonight, that was enough. Dawn came too quickly. Kaylor rose before the sun, moving quietly so as not to wake Elena and Tarek. They were both still asleep, curled together in the dim light. He looked at them for a long moment, committing the image to memory, then stepped outside. The camp was already stirring. A crowd had gathered in the center clearing, warriors, women, children. Everyone wanted to see this. Challenges were rare, sacred events. The outcome would determine not just leadership, but the future of the entire band. Rovan was already there, stripped to the waist, his skin oiled and gleaming in the early light. He looked confident, relaxed, like he'd already won. Kaylor moved to the opposite side of the circle, removing his shirt and checking his weapons. A knife, a short club, traditional tools for traditional combat. One of the elders, an old man named Neshoba who'd seen more battles than anyone still living, stepped into the center of the circle. This is a challenge for leadership, Neshoba announced in Apache, his voice carrying across the crowd. The rules are simple. Fight until one yields or until one cannot continue. The victor leads. The defeated follows or dies. Is this understood? Both Kaylor and Rovan nodded. Neshoba stepped back and the crowd fell silent. For a moment, nothing happened. The two men circled each other, eyes locked, measuring, waiting. Then Rovan lunged. He was fast, faster than Kaylor expected. His knife flashed in the morning light, aiming for Kaylor's ribs. Kaylor twisted, felt the blade slice across his side, shallow but painful. He brought his club up, catching Rovan in the shoulder, driving him back. They separated, circling again. Blood ran down Kaylor's side, hot and sticky. The cut wasn't deep, but it stung. Rovan grinned. First blood to me. Kaylor didn't respond. He was focused, calm. This wasn't about anger. It was about survival. They clashed again, a flurry of movement, knife, club, fists. Kaylor felt Rovan's blade graze his arm, felt his own club connect with Rovan's ribs. They broke apart, both breathing hard. The crowd was shouting now, cheering, calling out encouragement or insults. Kaylor blocked it all out. There was only Rovan, only the fight. Rovan came at him again, more aggressive this time, pressing the attack. Kaylor gave ground, letting Rovan think he was winning, waiting for the opening. And there, Rovan overextended, his weight too far forward. Kaylor sidestepped, brought his club down hard on Rovan's knife hand. Bone cracked. Rovan screamed, the knife tumbling from his grip. Kaylor didn't hesitate. He swept Rovan's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. Then he was on top of him, club raised, ready to finish it. Rovan stared up at him, eyes wide, chest heaving. His broken hand was already swelling, useless. He was beaten. They both knew it. "Yield," Kaylor said. Rovan's jaw clenched. For a moment, Kaylor thought he might refuse, might force him to deliver the killing blow. But then, slowly, Rovan nodded. "I yield," he rasped. The crowd erupted in noise, some cheering, some clearly disappointed. Kaylor stood, stepping back, lowering his weapon. His side throbbed, his arm burned, but he was alive. He'd won. Neshoba stepped forward again. "Kaylor remains chief. Rovan has yielded and will serve, or be exiled. What is your decision, Rovan?" Rovan climbed to his feet, cradling his broken hand, his face twisted with pain and humiliation. He looked at Kaylor, and for a moment there was pure hatred in his eyes. But then he bowed his head. "I will serve." It was the smart choice. Exile meant death out here. At least this way he'd live. Kaylor nodded. "Then it is settled." The crowd began to disperse, the excitement fading now that the spectacle was over. Kaylor stood in the center of the clearing, blood running down his side, exhaustion settling into his bones. He'd won. But he didn't feel victorious. He just felt tired. Elena appeared at his side, Tarek in her arms, her face pale. "You're hurt." "I am fine," Kaylor said, though the cut on his side was starting to burn in earnest now. "You're bleeding," Elena insisted. "Let me help." Kaylor didn't have the energy to argue. He let her guide him back to his wickiup, let her set Tarek down on a blanket, let her tend to his wounds with water and clean cloth. Her hands were gentle, careful. She didn't speak as she worked, and neither did he. But there was something intimate about the moment, something that went beyond the simple act of bandaging a cut. When she finished, she sat back, looking at him with those pale blue eyes. "You could have killed him." "Yes," Kaylor said. "Why didn't you?" Kaylor considered the question. The old him, the warrior who'd led raids and fought cavalry and never shown mercy, would have ended it, would have made an example of Rovan. But something had changed, something Elena had said about the world needing to be different, about refusing to keep doing the same things over and over. "Because mercy is also strength," Kaylor said, "and I am tired of death." Elena's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away quickly, blinking hard. "What is it?" Kaylor asked. "Nothing," Elena said. "It's just, for a moment there, you sounded like someone I used to know, someone good." "Your husband," Kaylor guessed. "Yes," Elena whispered. "He always said things like that. That kindness wasn't weakness, that the world needed more of it." "He was right," Kaylor said. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them, understanding, recognition, maybe even the beginning of something more. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not dying today." Kaylor almost smiled. "I try not to make a habit of it." And for the first time since he'd met her, Elena laughed. It was small, barely more than a breath, but it was real. Tarek chose that moment to wake up, his face scrunching as he prepared to cry. Elena scooped him up immediately, soothing him with soft words and gentle rocking. Kaylor watched them, these two people who had somehow become his entire world, and felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, but purpose, direction. He'd won the fight, but the real battle, the one for a different future, a better one, was just beginning. And that purpose would be tested sooner than Kaylor expected. 2 days after the challenge, a scout came riding in hard just after noon, his horse lathered and blowing. The young man, barely 20, named Chaska, slid from the saddle and ran straight to Kaylor. "Cavalry," he gasped, bent over with his hands on his knees. "Half a day's ride south. Maybe 40 soldiers. They're moving this direction." Kaylor felt his stomach drop. "You are certain?" "I saw their dust from the ridge," Chaska said, straightening. "Watched them through the glass for half an hour. Blue coats, rifles. They have a tracker with them. Looks like a Pima scout." That was bad. The Pima knew this territory almost as well as the Apache did. If they were tracking the band, they'd find them eventually. "Did they see you?" Kaylor asked. "No," Chaska said. "I stayed low. But they are following something. Maybe old trail, maybe fresh. I could not tell." Kaylor's mind raced. 40 soldiers was too many to fight head-on. The band had maybe 15 warriors capable of combat, and half of them were armed with bows and old rifles that misfired more often than they fired true. A direct confrontation would be suicide, which meant they had to move. Now. Gather the council, Kaylor said. We leave within the hour. Chaska nodded and ran off. Kaylor turned to find Elena standing a few yards away, Tarek in her arms, her face pale. You heard, Kaylor said. Yes, Elena said quietly. They're looking for me, aren't they? Kaylor didn't answer right away. The truth was, he didn't know. The cavalry could be on a routine patrol, or they could be hunting Apache, or yes, they could be searching for captives taken in the raid weeks ago. There was no way to be sure. Maybe, Kaylor admitted. But it does not matter. We cannot stay here. Where will you go? Elena asked. North, Kaylor said, into the high country. The soldiers will not follow us there. Too rough, too dangerous. Elena looked down at Tarek, who was chewing on his fist, oblivious to the danger. He's so small. The journey will be hard on him. Staying here will be harder, Kaylor said. If the cavalry finds us, everyone dies, including him. Elena nodded slowly, understanding. What do you need me to do? Pack light, Kaylor said. Only what you can carry. We move fast. Within the hour, the camp was in controlled chaos. Shelters were being dismantled, belongings rolled into bundles, children herded together. The older women worked quickly and efficiently. They'd done this before, fled from soldiers or rival bands or starvation. Survival was a skill honed over generations. Kaylor moved through the camp, checking preparations, making sure nothing critical was left behind. He found Rovan near the horses, his broken hand wrapped and splinted, his face still bruised from the fight. You ride at the rear, Kaylor told him. Watch for pursuit. Rovan looked at him, something unreadable in his expression. And if they catch up? You slow them down, Kaylor said. Give the others time to get away. It was a dangerous assignment, one that could easily turn fatal. Rovan knew it, but he also knew that refusing would be seen as cowardice. He'd yielded in the challenge, agreed to serve. Now he had to prove he meant it. Understood, Rovan said stiffly. Kaylor held his gaze for a moment longer, then moved on. He didn't trust Rovan, not completely, but right now he needed every able body. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. He found Elena near her shelter, struggling to tie a bundle of blankets and supplies with one hand while holding Tarek with the other. Kaylor took the bundle from her without a word and secured it properly. Thank you, Elena said. Can you ride? Kaylor asked. Elena blinked. Yes, I used to. Before. Good, Kaylor said. You will ride with me. Tarek too. We move faster that way. Elena looked surprised, then something like gratitude flickered across her face. Okay. They mounted up as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Kaylor rode a sturdy paint mare, Elena seated behind him with Tarek secured in a sling across her chest. It was awkward at first. Elena hadn't ridden in months, and she was stiff, uncertain. But she learned quickly, adjusting her balance, finding the rhythm of the horse's gait. The band moved north in a loose column. Warriors at the front and rear, women and children, and elders in the middle. They traveled light and fast, pushing the horses harder than was wise, but without choice. Behind them, somewhere in the gathering dusk, 40 cavalry soldiers were closing in. They rode through the night, stopping only twice to rest the horses and let the children catch their breath. Tarek fussed at first, uncomfortable and confused, but eventually exhausted himself into sleep against Elena's chest. Kaylor could feel her behind him, tense and alert, her arms wrapped protectively around his son. Around them, the land began to change. The flat scrub and desert gave way to rolling hills, then to steeper terrain studded with pine and juniper. The air grew cooler, thinner. This was the high country, remote, unforgiving, and perfect for disappearing. By dawn, they'd put maybe 20 miles between themselves and the original camp. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Kaylor called a halt near a spring tucked into a narrow canyon. The horses needed water, and the people needed rest. Elena slid down from the saddle with Kaylor's help, wincing as her legs took her weight. I'm going to feel that tomorrow, she muttered. You did well, Kaylor said. Many would not last that long. Elena gave him a tired smile. I'm tougher than I look. I know, Kaylor said, and meant it. While the others rested and tended to the animals, Kaylor climbed to a high point overlooking the canyon. From there, he could see the route they'd taken, The broken trail winding through the hills, the distant smudge of dust that might have been wind or might have been pursuit. Dakota joined him, breathing hard from the climb. You think they are still following? Yes, Kaylor said. They will not give up easily. We could split up, Dakota suggested. Make it harder to track us. And make us weaker, Kaylor countered. No, we stay together. Dakota nodded, though he looked unconvinced. Some of the men are talking. They say we should leave the captives behind, move faster without them. Kaylor turned to look at him. And what do you say? Dakota hesitated. I say, it is your decision, Chief. It was a diplomatic answer, one that revealed nothing of Dakota's true feelings, but Kaylor could guess. The captives, especially Elena, were seen as liabilities now, dead weight slowing them down, drawing the cavalry closer. The captives stay, Kaylor said firmly. We do not abandon our own. She is not our own, Dakota said quietly. She is white. Enemy. She keeps my son alive, Kaylor said. That makes her ours. Dakota looked like he wanted to argue, but he held his tongue. After a moment, he nodded and climbed back down the slope. Kaylor stayed on the ridge a while longer, watching the horizon, thinking. Dakota was right about one thing. The cavalry was getting closer. He could feel it, the way an animal feels a storm coming. They had a day, maybe two, before the soldiers caught up. And when that happened, Kaylor would have to make a choice. Fight and die, or surrender and face execution. Neither option was acceptable. So he'd have to find a third way. By midday, the band was moving again, pushing deeper into the high country. The terrain grew rougher, steep slopes, narrow passes, dense stands of pine that blocked the sun. It was hard going, especially for the children and elders, but it was also good cover. The cavalry would struggle to follow them here. That night, they made camp in a small clearing surrounded by boulders and thick brush. There was no fire, too risky. They ate cold rations and huddled together for warmth as the temperature dropped. Kaylor sat with his back against a rock, Tarek asleep in his arms. Elena was nearby, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the darkness. You are quiet, Kaylor said. Thinking, Elena replied. About what? Elena was silent for a long moment. Then, about what happens if they catch us. Kaylor didn't answer right away. He'd been thinking about the same thing. They will not catch us, he said finally. You don't know that, Elena said. And even if we get away this time, what about the next time? Or the time after that? How long can we keep running? It was the question Kaylor had been avoiding, because the answer was simple and brutal, not long. The Apache were a dying people, their land shrinking every year, their numbers dwindling. Running only delayed the inevitable. As long as we must, Kaylor said. Until there is no more running to do. And then? Elena pressed. And then we fight, Kaylor said. Or we die. That is the way of things. Elena pulled the blanket tighter around herself. There has to be another way. If there is, I have not found it, Kaylor said. They sat in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Around them, the camp settled into uneasy sleep, people too exhausted to stay awake, but too frightened to rest easy. Kaylor closed his eyes, feeling the weight of Tarek in his arms, the ache in his side where Rovon's knife had cut him, the cold seeping through his clothes. He was tired. So tired. But he couldn't rest, not yet, not while danger was still coming. The attack came just before dawn. Kaylor heard the shout first, a warning cry from one of the sentries, then gunfire, sharp and sudden, echoing through the canyon. He was on his feet in seconds, Tarek thrust into Elena's arms. Stay down, he ordered, then grabbed his rifle and ran toward the sound. The cavalry had found them. Maybe a dozen soldiers, dismounted, moving through the trees with rifles raised. They must have ridden through the night, tracked them by moonlight, caught up while the band slept. Kaylor fired, saw one of the soldiers stumble and fall. Around him, the other warriors were scrambling into position, returning fire. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. The cavalry had the high ground, the better weapons, the element of surprise. This was going to be a slaughter. Fall back, Kaylor shouted in Apache. Protect the families. The warriors retreated in a fighting withdrawal, laying down covering fire while the women and children fled deeper into the canyon. It was chaos. people running, screaming, gunfire ripping through the pre-dawn darkness. Kaylor saw Rovan on the far side of the clearing, firing methodically despite his broken hand, his face set in grim determination. Saw Dakota go down with a bullet in the leg, crawling for cover. Saw the cavalry advancing, relentless and disciplined. They were going to lose. And then, through the smoke and noise, Kaylor saw something that made his blood run cold. 2 soldiers had broken away from the main group. They were moving toward the cluster of rocks where Elena had been sheltering, where Tarek was. Kaylor ran, abandoning his position, ignoring the bullets kicking up dirt around his feet. He had one thought, one desperate need: get to his son. He reached the rocks just as the soldiers did. One of them, a sergeant with gray in his beard, had Elena by the arm, was trying to pull her out of the shelter. She was fighting, kicking, screaming, clutching Tarek against her chest. "Let her go!" Kaylor roared in English. The sergeant turned, bringing his pistol up, but Kaylor was faster. He closed the distance, knocked the gun aside, drove his knife into the man's side. The sergeant gasped, stumbled back, and collapsed. The second soldier raised his rifle, but Elena stuck out her leg and tripped him. He went down hard, and Kaylor was on him in an instant, disarming him, ending it with brutal efficiency. Then he grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her up. "Run!" They ran, crashing through the brush, Tarek wailing in Elena's arms. Behind them, the gunfire was fading as the warriors pulled back, abandoning the camp, scattering into the wilderness. Kaylor led Elena up a steep slope, using handholds and roots to climb, until they reached a ledge hidden by overhanging rock. There they stopped, gasping for breath. Below, the cavalry was regrouping, tending to their wounded, searching the abandoned camp. Kaylor counted the bodies. 3 soldiers down, maybe 4, but also 2 Apache warriors lying still in the dirt. Too high a price. Elena was shaking, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tarek was crying, a high, frightened sound that cut through Kaylor like a blade. "Shh," Elena whispered, rocking him. "Shh, it's okay. You're okay." But it wasn't okay. Kaylor could see that in her eyes. She was terrified, traumatized, barely holding it together. "We are safe here," Kaylor said quietly. "They will not find us." "For how long?" Elena asked, her voice breaking. "How long until they come back? How long until—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Kaylor didn't have an answer, so he just sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and waited for the cavalry to leave. It took hours. The soldiers searched the area thoroughly, calling out for survivors, checking every rock and crevice. But they didn't find the ledge where Kaylor and Elena hid. Eventually, as the sun climbed higher and the heat intensified, they gave up and rode out, heading back south. Kaylor waited another hour before moving, making sure it wasn't a trick, that they weren't leaving men behind to watch. Finally, when he was certain it was safe, he climbed down and helped Elena follow. The camp was destroyed. What few possessions they'd brought were scattered or stolen. The bodies of the fallen warriors had been left where they'd fallen. The cavalry hadn't bothered to bury them. Kaylor stood over the bodies of his men, brave warriors who'd fought to protect their families, and felt rage and grief twist together in his chest. This was what it had come to: running, hiding, dying, all because they refused to give up the last scraps of their freedom. "Kaylor," Elena said softly behind him. He turned to find her standing with Tarek, her expression full of sympathy and sorrow. "We need to find the others," she said. "We need to make sure they're safe." Kaylor nodded. She was right. Grief could wait. Survival came first. They spent the rest of the day searching, following broken trails and scattered tracks, calling out carefully in case the cavalry had left scouts behind. One by one, they found survivors, small groups hiding in ravines and thickets, frightened but alive. By evening, they'd gathered maybe 30 people out of the original 40. 10 were missing, dead, captured, or fled on their own. It was a devastating loss. They made camp that night in a cave system Kaylor knew from his youth, deep in the mountains where the cavalry wouldn't dare follow. There was no celebration, no relief at having survived, just exhausted silence and the weight of everything they'd lost. Kaylor sat at the mouth of the cave, staring out at the darkening sky. Elena joined him after putting Tarek to sleep, wrapped in the same blanket as before. "Is it always like this?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Kaylor said. For as long as I can remember, fight, run, hide, then fight again. I'm sorry, Elena said. Kaylor looked at her, surprised. Why? You did not cause this. No, Elena said. But my people did. The cavalry, the settlers, the government, we took everything from you, and we're still taking. It was true. But hearing her say it, acknowledging it, meant something, more than Kaylor expected. You are not like them, Kaylor said. You are here. You stayed. I didn't have a choice, Elena said. You have choice now, Kaylor pointed out. The soldiers, they would have taken you, protected you, taken you back to your people. You could have called out to them. Elena looked down at her hands. I know. But you did not. No, Elena admitted. I didn't. Why? Kaylor asked. Elena was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about survival. This, you, Tarek, even this impossible situation became something more. I don't know what to call it. I don't know if there's even a word for it, but I couldn't leave. I couldn't let them take me away from him. She looked up, meeting Kaylor's eyes. From either of you. Kaylor felt something shift in his chest, something warm and terrifying and entirely unexpected. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. She didn't pull away. You are not captive anymore, Kaylor said. You are something else. What? Elena asked. Kaylor searched for the word in English, found it, and spoke it carefully. Family. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed his hand, holding on like it was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to chaos. Family, she repeated. Okay. Yes. They sat like that until full dark, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge one by one above the mountains. Around them, the camp settled into uneasy rest. Inside the cave, Tarek slept peacefully, unaware that his world had just shifted on its axis. The next morning, Kaylor called what remained of the council together. Rovan was there, his hand still splinted, his face haggard. Dakota limped over, his leg bandaged but functional. The elders, 3 old men and 2 women who'd survived more hardships than anyone could count, sat in a semicircle waiting. We cannot keep running, Kaylor said without preamble. Yesterday proved that. The cavalry is too close, too persistent. They will hunt us until we are all dead or captured. So what do you propose? Rovan asked, his voice rough. Surrender? No, Kaylor said firmly. We find a new way, a different way. There is no different way, one of the elders, a woman named Ayana, said wearily. We fight until we die, or we submit and die slowly on a reservation. Those are the only choices the whites have left us. Maybe not, Kaylor said. What if we could negotiate? What if we could find terms that let us keep some of our freedom, some of our land? The council erupted in angry muttering. The idea of negotiating with the cavalry, with the government, was seen as weakness, as betrayal of everything they'd fought for. They will never honor any agreement, Rovan said bitterly. They lie, always. Some lie, Kaylor agreed, but not all. And even a lie can buy us time to heal, time to plan, time to survive. You sound like her, Rovan said, jerking his head toward where Elena sat at the edge of the gathering, holding Tarek. The white woman. She has poisoned your mind. She has opened my mind, Kaylor corrected. Shown me that enemies can become allies, that hatred does not have to be forever. Pretty words, Rovan sneered, but words will not save us when the soldiers come. No, Kaylor agreed, but wisdom might, and I'm tired of watching our people die for pride. The council fell silent. It was a shocking admission, a chief openly questioning the path of endless resistance that had defined Apache survival for generations. Ayana studied Kaylor with ancient, knowing eyes. What would you have us do then? Send a white flag? Beg for mercy? I would have us use the one advantage we still possess, Kaylor said. Knowledge of this land. The cavalry cannot follow us into the deepest mountains. They cannot survive where we can. We use that. We make them realize that hunting us costs more than it is worth. And if that does not work, Dakota asked, then we fight, Kaylor said. But we fight smart. We choose our battles. We protect our families first, our pride second. It was a radical shift in strategy, one that went against everything the band had been taught. But Kaylor could see understanding dawning in some of their faces. They were tired. Tired of running, tired of dying, tired of losing. I will think on this, Ayanna said finally. We will all think on this. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a crack in the wall, a tiny opening. Kaylor would take it. As the council dispersed, Elena approached him. That took courage, she said quietly, speaking against everything they believe. Or stupidity, Kaylor said. I am not yet certain which. Elena smiled slightly. I think it's courage, and I think maybe you're right about finding a different way. You are the one who suggested it, Kaylor pointed out. I said the world needed to change, Elena corrected. You're the one actually trying to change it. Kaylor looked at her, this woman who'd lost everything, who had every reason to hate him and his people, but who'd chosen to stay, to help, to become part of something larger than her own pain. We try together, he said. Elena reached out and took his hand, the gesture natural now, comfortable. Together, she agreed. Tarek chose that moment to reach out from Elena's arms, tiny fingers grasping toward Kaylor. Kaylor took him, holding his son carefully, and felt the weight of responsibility settle over him like a mantle. This child would grow up in a different world than Kaylor had known. It had to be. Because the old world was dying, and clinging to it would only drag them all down into the grave. So Kaylor would build something new. He didn't know if it would work, didn't know if he'd live long enough to see it through. But he had to try. For Tarek, for Elena, for all of them. The world would change because they refused to keep doing the same things over and over, one small choice at a time, starting now. That new world, however, would have to wait. Because 2 weeks later, as the band struggled to establish a more permanent camp in the high mountains, a different threat emerged. One Kaylor hadn't anticipated. It started with the children. 3 of them came down with fever within days of each other, then 2 of the elders. By the end of the week, nearly half the camp was sick, burning with fever, racked with coughing fits that left them gasping and weak. Kaylor recognized it immediately. He'd seen it before, years ago, when a similar sickness had swept through another band and killed a third of them. The whites called it influenza. The Apache had no name for it, only fear. Elena noticed the spreading illness at the same time he did. She came to him one evening as he sat outside the main cave, watching the sick being tended by those still healthy. It's spreading fast, she said, her voice tight with worry. Faster than anything I've seen. Yes, Kaylor said grimly. It will get worse before it gets better. If it gets better. Elena shifted Tarek in her arms. He was healthy still, thank the spirits, but that could change at any moment. We need medicine. Real medicine, not just herbs and prayers. We have no medicine, Kaylor said, and no way to get it. Elena was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, There's a trading post, 3 days' ride southeast. I remember passing it with my husband before... She trailed off, the memory clearly painful. They'd have medicine there, quinine maybe, willow bark extract, something. Kaylor shook his head. Too dangerous. The cavalry patrols that area. And even if we reached it, they would not trade with Apache. They'd trade with me, Elena said. Kaylor turned to look at her sharply. No. Kaylor, listen. No, he repeated more firmly. It is too dangerous. You would be recognized, questioned. They might not let you leave. They might not, Elena agreed, but they also might give me what we need. And right now, people are dying. Children are dying. We have to try something. Kaylor stood, agitation making him restless. I cannot risk losing you. Or Tarek. Elena's expression softened. I know. But you also can't watch your people die when there's a chance to save them. That's not who you are. She was right, and Kaylor hated it. Hated that she could see through him so easily, could identify the conflict tearing him apart. He was chief. His people came first. But Elena and Tarek had become his people too, in a way that went deeper than duty or obligation. If something happens to you, he started, then you'll take care of Tarek, Elena finished. You'll raise him, teach him, keep him safe. I know you will. Kaylor wanted to argue,
to forbid her from going, but he could see the determination in her eyes. She'd made up her mind. "I will go with you," he said finally. "No," Elena said immediately. "You're needed here. And if we both go and something happens, who takes care of your son? Who leads these people?" Again, she was right. Kaylor felt trapped, caught between impossible choices.
"Rovan will go with you," he said, "and Dakota, they will protect you." Elena looked surprised. "Rovan hates me." "Rovan hates weakness," Kaylor corrected. "But he is a warrior. He will do what must be done." It took another hour of argument, but eventually Elena agreed to let Rovan and Dakota accompany her. Kaylor spent that night preparing, checking their weapons, their supplies, mapping out the safest route to the trading post and back. When dawn came, he found himself standing beside Elena's horse, reluctant to let her go. 3 days there, 1 day to trade, 3 days back, Kaylor said, going over the plan for the 5th time. "If you are not back in 8 days, I will come looking." "We'll be back," Elena said. She'd left Tarek in the care of one of the older women, and Kaylor could see how much it cost her. Her arms looked empty without him. "He will be safe," Kaylor promised. "I will watch him myself." Elena nodded, blinking back tears. Then, impulsively, she leaned down from the saddle and kissed Kaylor's cheek. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips against skin, but it sent electricity through him. "Be careful," she whispered. Before Kaylor could respond, she'd straightened and urged her horse forward. Rovan and Dakota fell in beside her, and the 3 of them rode out of camp as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. Kaylor stood watching until they disappeared into the trees, a knot of anxiety tight in his chest. The next 7 days were the longest of Kaylor's life. The sickness continued to spread despite the efforts of the medicine women. 2 children died on the 3rd day. One of the elders passed on the 5th. Each loss felt like a blade twisting in Kaylor's gut. He threw himself into caring for Tarek, feeding him goat's milk when the baby fussed for Elena, rocking him through the nights when he wouldn't settle. It was exhausting, humbling work. Kaylor had newfound respect for what Elena had been doing all these weeks. The baby missed her. Kaylor could see it in the way Tarek's eyes would search the cave entrance, the way he'd cry harder when it wasn't Elena who came to comfort him. It broke Kaylor's heart a little more each time. On the 6th day, Kaylor was sitting outside with Tarek when Ayana approached. The old woman looked frailer than before, her face drawn with exhaustion. "The sickness is winning," she said without preamble. "We will lose more before this is over." "I know," Kaylor said quietly. "The white woman," Ayana continued. "You trust her to return?" It was a valid question. Elena had every reason to keep riding once she reached the trading post. She could claim she'd escaped, find her way back to white settlements, restart the life that had been taken from her. "Yes," Kaylor said. "I trust her." Ayana studied him with those ancient eyes. "You care for her, more than is wise." Kaylor didn't deny it. "She saved my son. She has become—" He paused, searching for the right words. "She has become important." "Important," Ayana repeated, and there might have been amusement in her tone. "That is one word for it." "What would you call it?" Kaylor asked. "Love," Ayana said simply. "Though you are both too stubborn to name it." Kaylor felt his face heat. "It is not. We are not—" "You are not what?" Ayana interrupted. "Two people who have found something precious in the midst of darkness? Two souls who have chosen each other despite everything that should keep you apart?" She shook her head. "I am old, Kaylor. I have seen much, and I know love when I see it, even when those who feel it do not." Kaylor looked down at Tarek, sleeping peacefully in his arms. "It does not matter what I feel. The world will not allow it." "The world allows what we make it allow," Ayana said. "You spoke of finding a new way, a different path. Perhaps this is part of it." Before Kaylor could respond, a shout went up from the edge of camp. He handed Tarek carefully to Ayana and ran toward the sound, his heart hammering. 3 riders were approaching through the trees. Kaylor recognized them immediately: Rovan, Dakota, and Elena. They were back, and they were alive. Relief flooded through Kaylor so powerfully it nearly brought him to his knees. He forced himself to walk, not run, to meet them. Elena slid from her horse, looking exhausted but unhurt, and immediately her eyes searched for Tarek. "He's safe," Kaylor said quickly. "With Ayana. He is well." Elena's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank the—" She stopped herself, remembering where she was. "Thank you for taking care of him." "You brought medicine?" Kaylor asked. In answer, Rovan dismounted and pulled a large canvas bag from his saddle. Quinine, willow bark powder, something the trader called cough syrup, and clean bandages. Kaylor took the bag, feeling the weight of it, the hope it represented. "How did you get all this?" "She traded her wedding ring," Dakota said, nodding toward Elena. "And a locket, family things. The trader was suspicious at first, but she convinced him she was a settler's wife from a homestead to the north, said her children were sick." Kaylor looked at Elena, saw the bare finger where the ring had been, saw the loss in her eyes. Those items had been the last physical connection to her dead husband, to the life she'd lost. "You did not have to—" he started. "Yes, I did," Elena said firmly. "They were just things. These people are alive. It was an easy choice." But Kaylor could see the lie in her eyes. It hadn't been easy at all. It had cost her something precious. And she'd paid it anyway. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate but sincere. Elena nodded, then her composure cracked slightly. "Can I see him, Tarek?" "Of course," Kaylor said. He led her to where Ayana sat with the baby. Tarek was awake now, making small cooing sounds. When he saw Elena, his whole face lit up, and he reached for her with both hands. Elena gathered him into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "I missed you so much," she whispered. So much." Kaylor watched them, feeling that warmth in his chest again, that terrifying, wonderful feeling that Ayana had named. Love. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps that's what this was. The medicine helped. Not everyone. 2 more elders died, and 1 young warrior whose fever had gone too high. But it turned the tide. Within a week, the worst was over. The remaining sick began to recover, slowly but steadily. Life in the camp settled into a new rhythm. The band was smaller now, scarred by loss, but also somehow stronger. They'd survived another trial. And Elena's sacrifice, trading away her last treasures to save Apache lives, had not gone unnoticed. The women who'd been cold to her before began to soften. They included her in their work, taught her how to prepare certain foods, showed her how to tan hides properly. The change was subtle but significant. She was becoming one of them. One evening, as Elena sat with a group of women scraping a deer hide, Kaylor overheard their conversation. "Your hands are too soft," one of the younger women, called Kimimila, said with a laugh. "You need calluses for this work." "I'm getting them," Elena said, showing her palms. They were indeed rougher than they'd been, marked with small cuts and blisters. "Just slowly." "White women's skin," another woman teased, "too delicate." "This white woman climbed into the high country on horseback while pregnant women and elders barely managed," Elena shot back, but she was smiling. "I think I'm tougher than you give me credit for." The women laughed, and there was acceptance in the sound. Real acceptance, not just tolerance. Kaylor felt something loosen in his chest. Elena was finding her place, building connections, becoming part of the community not through force or necessity, but through choice and earned respect. That night, after Tarek had been fed and put to sleep, Kaylor found Elena sitting outside the cave entrance, staring up at the stars. "May I join you?" he asked. Elena looked over and smiled. "Of course." Kaylor sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. For a while they didn't speak, just sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the mountains, wind through the pines, the distant call of an owl, the crackle of the fire behind them. "The women are accepting you," Kaylor said finally. "Some of them," Elena agreed. "Not all, but it's better than it was." "You have earned their respect," Kaylor said. "What you did, trading your treasures for medicine, that meant something to them." Elena was quiet for a moment, then, "Those things were from my old life, a life that's gone. I can't get it back, no matter how hard I hold on to pieces of it. So maybe it's time to let go. Build something new." "And what would you build?" Kaylor asked, curious. Elena looked at him, her pale eyes reflecting starlight.
I don't know yet, but I think it starts here, with you, with Tarek, with these people who took me in, even when they had every reason not to. Kaylor felt his heart beating faster. You would stay, even if you had a choice? I have a choice now, Elena said. I could have kept riding when we reached the trading post. Rovan and Dakota wouldn't have stopped me, not really. But I came back, because this is where I want to be. Kaylor reached out and took her hand, the gesture natural now, necessary. I'm glad you came back. So am I, Elena said softly. They sat like that, hands clasped, until the fire burned down to embers and the stars wheeled overhead. It felt like a promise, though neither of them spoke the words aloud. But promises, Kaylor knew, were fragile things, and the world had a way of breaking them. The threat came from an unexpected direction. 3 weeks after Elena's return, a rider appeared at the edge of camp. He was Apache, but not from their band, a messenger from another group that had been ranging to the west. His news was grim. A large cavalry force, more than 100 soldiers, was sweeping through the territory, systematically hunting down the remaining Apache bands. They weren't just patrolling anymore. They were executing a coordinated campaign of extermination. They mean to finish us, the messenger said, his face haggard. All of us. They are offering terms, surrender and go to the reservation, or be hunted down and killed. The camp erupted in angry voices. Some wanted to fight. Others wanted to flee even deeper into the mountains. A few, the most worn down, the most tired, spoke quietly of accepting the terms. Kaylor listened to all of it, his mind racing. 100 soldiers was too many to fight, but surrender meant giving up everything, their freedom, their way of life, their dignity. What are the other bands doing? He asked the messenger. Some have surrendered, the man admitted. Others are still running. One group tried to fight. They were slaughtered, men, women, children. The cavalry showed no mercy. The camp fell silent at that. The message was clear. Resist and die, or submit and live as prisoners. Rovan stepped forward, his face dark with rage. We do not surrender. We fight. We die as warriors, not as cattle being led to slaughter. And what of the children? Ayana asked quietly. The mothers? The elders? They die too because of pride? Better to die free than live in chains, Rovan shot back. You speak for yourself, one of the mothers said, her voice shaking. Not for my children. The argument escalated, voices rising, people taking sides. Kaylor could see the band fracturing before his eyes, splitting along lines of ideology and fear. Enough, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. The camp fell silent, all eyes turning to him. This is not a decision to make in anger, Kaylor said. We will think, we will plan, and then we will decide together as a people. It wasn't an answer, but it bought time. The messenger was given food and water and a place to rest. The council gathered again, and Kaylor laid out the situation as clearly as he could. We have 3 choices, he said. Fight and likely die. Flee deeper into the mountains and slowly starve, or surrender and live, but as prisoners. Those are not choices, Rovan said bitterly. Those are different kinds of death. Maybe, Kaylor said, but one of them gives us time. Time to survive, to heal, to plan. And time means hope. Hope for what? Rovan demanded. That the whites will suddenly decide to give us back our land? That they will stop killing us? There is no hope, Kaylor. Only the choice of how we die. Kaylor looked around the circle, at Ayana's tired face, at Dakota's haunted eyes, at the other warriors and elders who'd given so much and had so little left. I do not know what to do, Kaylor admitted, and it was the hardest thing he'd ever said. I do not know how to save us. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Then Elena spoke. She'd been sitting at the edge of the circle, holding Tarek, staying quiet as was proper for someone not formally part of the council. But now she stood. May I speak? She asked. Kaylor nodded, surprised but curious. Elena took a breath, clearly nervous. I know I'm not Apache. I know I don't have the right to tell you what to do. But I've lived with you for months now. I've seen your strength, your courage, your love for each other. And I've also seen how the world treats you, how my people treat you. It's not fair, it's not right. But it's the reality we live in.
She paused, adjusting Tarek in her arms. Where I come from, there's a saying, live to fight another day. It means that sometimes survival is the bravest choice, that staying alive when everything is trying to kill you is its own kind of victory. You suggest we surrender, Rovan said, his voice dripping with contempt. I suggest you survive, Elena corrected. I suggest you choose the option that keeps your children alive, that keeps your culture alive, that keeps the possibility of a future alive. The reservation is terrible, I won't pretend it isn't, but it's not death. And as long as you're alive, you can resist in other ways. Quieter ways. Ways that don't end with everyone you love in the ground. Rovan stood abruptly. I will not listen to this. A white woman telling us to accept our own destruction? She is not destroying us, Kaylor interrupted, his voice firm. She is trying to help us see clearly. And maybe she is right. The council exploded in argument again, but this time Kaylor let it happen. Let them shout and rage and grieve. They needed it, needed to express all the anger and fear and helplessness they'd been carrying. When it finally died down, Ayana spoke. We should vote. Let each family decide for themselves. Those who wish to surrender can do so. Those who wish to fight can fight. We do not force anyone. It was a compromise, one that would split the band, but it was also the only fair solution. The vote happened the next morning. Of the 30 people remaining, 22 chose to surrender. 8, including Rovan and 3 other young warriors, chose to keep fighting. Kaylor stood before them, his heart heavy. Those who choose to fight, I respect your choice. You are warriors. You will die with honor. Rovan met his eyes, and for a moment, something passed between them. Not friendship, but understanding. They'd been on different paths for a long time. Now those paths were finally irrevocably diverging. And you, Chief? Rovan asked. What do you choose? Kaylor looked at Elena, standing nearby with Tarek. Looked at the families huddled together, frightened but hopeful. Looked at Ayana and the other elders who'd survived so much already. I choose life, Kaylor said. I choose my son's future. I choose to survive so that someday, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in my lifetime, but someday, we can be free again. Rovan nodded slowly. Then this is goodbye, Kaylor. You were a good chief, once. The words stung, but Kaylor accepted them. And you are a good warrior, always. Rovan and the others who'd chosen to fight left that afternoon, heading deeper into the mountains toward battles they wouldn't win but would fight anyway. Kaylor watched them go, knowing he'd likely never see them alive again. Elena stood beside him, silent support. Did I make the right choice? Kaylor asked quietly. I don't know, Elena admitted, but you made the choice that keeps Tarek alive, that keeps me alive, that keeps all of them alive. She gestured to the remaining families. And sometimes that's the only right choice there is. Kaylor took her hand, held it tight. Then we go to the reservation. We survive, and we wait for a better day. Together, Elena said. Together, Kaylor agreed, of course. 2 days later, they rode out under a white flag. Kaylor, Elena, Tarek, and the 22 others who'd chosen life over death. It was the hardest ride of Kaylor's life, every step feeling like betrayal, like surrender, like the end of everything he'd fought for. But it was also hope. Fragile, uncertain hope that somewhere beyond the darkness there might be light. And as long as he had Elena beside him and Tarek in his arms, he would keep reaching for it. The reservation was worse than anything Kaylor had imagined, and he tried to prepare himself for the worst. They arrived on a gray afternoon in late October, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened snow. The land was flat, barren, nothing like the mountains they'd left behind. A cluster of rough wooden buildings marked the agency office, and beyond that stretched rows of canvas tents and makeshift shelters where other Apache families huddled against the cold. A lieutenant met them at the edge of the compound, a young man with pale skin and nervous eyes who looked barely old enough to shave. He had a translator with him, a Pima man who spoke both Apache and English with equal fluency. "You are Kaylor's band?" the lieutenant asked through the translator. "What remains of it?" Kaylor answered in English, his voice flat. The lieutenant blinked, surprised. "You speak English?" "Yes," Kaylor said. "Will that be a problem?" No, the lieutenant said quickly. "It's just, most don't."
He consulted a ledger. 23 people, the report said, including one white woman and a child. Yes, Kyler said, feeling Elena tense beside him. The lieutenant's gaze moved to Elena, taking in her worn dress, her sun-darkened skin, the baby in her arms. Ma'am, are you here of your own free will?
Elena's grip on Tarek tightened. Kaylor could see the calculation in her eyes. This was her chance. She could say she'd been held captive, could ask for protection, could leave all of this behind and return to the world she'd come from.
Yes, Elena said clearly. I'm here by choice. The lieutenant frowned. You understand you don't have to stay? If you were taken against your will, I wasn't, Elena interrupted. Or I was, at first, but things changed. I'm staying.
The lieutenant looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Elena's expression stopped him. He made a note in his ledger, his mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Very well, he said. You'll be assigned shelter and rations. There are rules here. A curfew, no weapons, no alcohol, regular counts. Anyone who breaks the rules will be disciplined. Anyone who tries to leave without permission will be hunted down and brought back. Or shot. Is that clear? Very clear, Kaylor said, fighting to keep the bitterness out of his voice. They were led to a section of tents near the eastern edge of the compound. The tent they were assigned was threadbare, barely large enough for 2 people, let alone the small family they'd become. The ground inside was cold and hard, and wind whistled through gaps in the canvas. Elena looked around, her face carefully neutral, and then set about making it livable. She spread out the few blankets they had, arranged their meager possessions, created a small nest for Tarek in the corner. Kaylor watched her work, marveling at her resilience, her refusal to let circumstances break her. It's not much, Elena said when she'd finished. But it's shelter. It's something. It is a cage, Kaylor said quietly. Elena came to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Yes, she agreed. But we're alive. And as long as we're alive, there's a chance for something better. Kaylor wanted to believe her, but as he looked out at the rows of tents, at the hollow-eyed families moving between them like ghosts, he felt hope slipping through his fingers like sand. The first weeks were brutal. The rations provided by the agency were barely enough to keep them from starving. Weevil-infested flour, rancid bacon, beans so old they wouldn't soften no matter how long you boiled them. The water was brackish and made people sick. Disease spread quickly in the crowded conditions: dysentery, pneumonia, tuberculosis. People died. Not in battle, not fighting for their freedom, but slowly, quietly, of despair and illness and broken spirits. Kaylor watched it happen and felt his own spirit fracturing. This was what survival looked like. Not noble, not heroic, just a slow grinding down of everything that had made them who they were. Elena saw the change in him, saw the light going out of his eyes. One night, as they lay in the tent with Tarek sleeping between them, she reached out and took his hand. "Talk to me," she said quietly. "There is nothing to say," Kaylor replied. "There's always something to say," Elena insisted. "Even if it's just, I hate this, or I'm scared, or I don't know how much more I can take." Kaylor was silent for a long time. Then, "I brought them here to die. Slowly, but still dying. I should have fought. Should have chosen death with honor instead of this slow poison." "You chose life," Elena said firmly. "You chose to give Tarek a chance to grow up. You chose to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. That's not weakness. That's love." "Love," Kaylor said bitterly. "Love does not keep them warm, does not fill their bellies, does not give them back what was taken." "No," Elena agreed, "but it keeps them human. It reminds them they're worth saving. And maybe that's enough to get through today, and then tomorrow, and the day after that." Kaylor turned to look at her in the darkness. He could barely see her face, just the outline of her profile, the glint of her eyes. "How do you do it? How do you stay hopeful when everything is falling apart?" Elena's laugh was soft and sad. "I'm not hopeful. Not really. I'm terrified most of the time. Terrified that Tarek will get sick, that you'll give up, that this will break us. But I keep going because the alternative is giving up. And I've already lost too much to lose anything else." She squeezed his hand. "We survive this together, Kaylor. Not because it's easy, not because we want to, but because we refuse to let them destroy us. That's how we win. Not through fighting, but through surviving, through staying human when everything tries to turn us into animals or ghosts. Kaylor pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, feeling the solid warmth of her against him. Tarek stirred between them, making small sleeping sounds, and Kaylor felt something shift in his chest. Not hope, exactly, but determination. He would survive this. They would survive this. Because the alternative was unthinkable. As winter deepened, Kaylor began to notice something unexpected. Despite the harsh conditions, despite the death and despair, small acts of resistance were taking root. The Apache families weren't just surviving, they were adapting, finding ways to maintain their culture even within the cage of the reservation. Women taught their daughters the old songs in whispers. Men passed down stories and traditions in quiet moments. Children played games their grandparents had taught them, keeping the past alive in small, stubborn ways. Kaylor joined in where he could. He taught the young boys how to track, how to read the land, how to move silently through brush. He shared stories of battles and hunts, not glorifying war, but teaching the values that had kept the Apache strong: courage, community, respect for the land. Elena, meanwhile, had found her own role. Her ability to speak English made her invaluable as a translator and advocate. When families had disputes with the agency, she helped them navigate the bureaucracy. When children fell sick, she worked with the agency doctor, a gruff but decent man named Dr. Winters, to get them medicine. She became a bridge between two worlds, trusted by both sides, even when they didn't trust each other. It was exhausting, thankless work, but Elena threw herself into it with fierce determination. One afternoon in early December, Kaylor returned to their tent to find Elena in heated discussion with Dr. Winters. The doctor was a big man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and kind eyes. "I'm telling you, the rations aren't enough," Elena was saying. "Half the children are malnourished. They're getting sick because their bodies can't fight off infection." "I know," Dr. Winters said wearily. "I've sent reports to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Multiple reports. They don't care." "Then we make them care," Elena said. "We document everything, every sick child, every death, every case of starvation or disease, and we send it to newspapers, to politicians, to anyone who might listen." Dr. Winters looked skeptical. "You think anyone out there cares what happens to a bunch of Apache on a reservation?" "Some might not," Elena admitted. "But some will. There are good people in the world, Doctor, people who believe in justice. We just have to reach them." The doctor studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, I'll help, but I can't promise it will make a difference." "It's better than doing nothing," Elena said. Kaylor felt a surge of pride watching her. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, fierce, unbreakable, refusing to accept injustice even when it would be easier to look away. That night, as they prepared for sleep, Kaylor said quietly, "You are becoming a warrior, just a different kind." Elena smiled. "I learned from the best." Winter was hard. 3 more elders died, and 2 children. Each loss felt like a piece of their collective soul being torn away. But they endured. They survived. And slowly, impossibly, spring came. With the warming weather came a visitor, a man Kaylor hadn't expected to see again. Rovan walked into the reservation compound on a warm April afternoon, his clothes torn and dirty, his face gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. Kaylor saw him first and felt his heart lurch. Rovan was alone. The other warriors who'd left with him were nowhere to be seen. They stood facing each other in the dusty space between tents, neither speaking for a long moment. Finally, Kaylor said, "The others?" "Dead," Rovan said flatly. "All of them. We fought for 3 months, ambushed supply wagons, raided settlements, killed maybe a dozen soldiers. Then the cavalry caught up with us. It was over fast." "How did you survive?" Kaylor asked. Rovan's laugh was bitter. "I ran, like a coward, left them fighting, and ran." He looked at Kaylor with hollow eyes. "You were right. Fighting was just dying slowly in a different way. At least here, people survive." Kaylor felt no satisfaction in being proven right, only sadness. "You are welcome here, if you want to stay." Rovan looked around at the tents, at the people moving through the compound, at the guards watching from the agency buildings. "This is hell, but it's better than the grave." He stayed. And slowly, painfully, he began to rebuild himself. The anger that had driven him for so long mellowed into something quieter, not acceptance, but acknowledgement. This was the world they lived in now. Fighting it wouldn't change it. Surviving it might. That summer, Elena's advocacy began to bear fruit. A journalist from a New York newspaper came to visit the reservation, brought by Dr. Winters and armed with Elena's documentation. He interviewed families, took photographs, documented the conditions. The article that resulted was scathing. It painted a picture of neglect and cruelty, of government promises broken and people suffering. It caused a minor scandal back east, and while change was slow, it did come. Rations improved slightly. A school was built. Small things, but meaningful. Elena was tireless, pushing for more improvements, never satisfied, always fighting. And Kaylor fought alongside her, no longer with weapons, but with words, with persistence, with the stubborn refusal to be erased. Tarek grew through all of this, oblivious to the struggles around him. At a year old, he was a happy, healthy boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's, because that's what Elena had become, in every way that mattered, fierce spirit. One evening in late summer, as the sun set orange and gold over the flat reservation land, Kaylor and Elena sat outside their tent watching Tarek take his first wobbling steps. The boy would toddle a few paces, fall on his bottom, laugh, and try again. "He's persistent," Elena said, smiling. "Like his mother," Kaylor said. Elena glanced at him. "I'm not his mother. Not really." "You are in every way that matters," Kaylor said. "Blood does not make family. Love does. Choice does. You chose him. You chose us. That makes you his mother." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I do love him. So much it scares me sometimes." "I know," Kaylor said. "I feel the same." He paused, then said carefully, "And I love you. I do not know when it happened or how, but it is true. You are everything to me." Elena turned to face him fully, tears streaming down her face now. "I love you too. I've loved you for months, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon, too complicated, too—" Kaylor kissed her, cutting off her words. It was gentle at first, tentative, and then deeper as she leaned into him. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," Kaylor said, not in their way with papers and priests, but in our way. "Let me be your husband and you my wife, and let us build a family from all this broken pieces." Elena nodded, unable to speak, and Kaylor pulled her close as Tarek toddled over and grabbed onto his father's leg, laughing. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony conducted by Ayana. There was no feast, no celebration, just quiet words spoken under the open sky, witnessed by the people who'd become their family. Kaylor gave Elena a bracelet he'd woven from leather and traded beads. Elena gave Kaylor a shirt she'd sewn by hand, decorated with careful stitching. It wasn't grand, but it was real, and it was theirs. The years that followed were not easy. The reservation remained harsh, restrictive, a daily reminder of everything they'd lost. But Kaylor and Elena built a life within those constraints. They had more children, a daughter they named Naira, after Kaylor's first wife, and then a son they called Samuel after Elena's dead husband. The children grew up speaking both Apache and English, learning both worlds, belonging fully to neither but carrying the best of both. Kaylor aged into the role of elder, respected by the younger generation for his wisdom and his willingness to adapt. He never forgot the mountains, never stopped missing the freedom they'd had, but he also never regretted the choice to survive. Because survival had given him a family he loved, a purpose that sustained him, and a future that extended beyond his own life. Elena became known throughout the territory as a fierce advocate for Apache rights. She worked with reformers, with sympathetic politicians, with anyone who would listen. She never stopped fighting for better conditions, better treatment, better futures for the people she'd adopted as her own. Rovan, surprisingly, became one of Kaylor's closest allies. The old rivalry had burned itself out, leaving behind respect in something that might have been friendship. Rovan never married, never seemed to want to, but he became a beloved uncle to Kaylor's children and a trusted counselor to the community. The reservation changed too, slowly. Schools were built. Some families were allowed to farm small plots of land. The worst abuses were curtailed, though injustice remained. It was progress measured in inches rather than miles, but it was progress. And through it all, Kylor and Elena held on to each other, held on to their family, held on to the stubborn belief that the world could be better if people refused to give up on making it so. 20 years after they'd ridden into the reservation compound under a white flag, Kylor sat on the porch of the small house the government had finally allowed them to build. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, a leaking roof, a floor that creaked, but it was theirs. Elena sat beside him, her hair now streaked with gray, her hands rough from years of work. Tarek, now a young man of 21, stood nearby talking with his siblings. He'd grown tall and strong, with his father's bearing and his mother's sharp mind. He'd been educated in the reservation school, spoke perfect English, and was training to be a teacher himself. Naira, 18, was helping her mother with the mending, her hands quick and skilled. Samuel, 16, was practicing his tracking skills with some of the other boys, determined to learn the old ways even as he prepared to navigate the new world. "Look at them," Elena said softly. "Look at what we built." Kylor took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years. "We survived, and they will survive. Better than we did. Because of you," Elena said. "Because you chose life over death. Because you chose love over hate." "Because we chose," Kylor corrected, "together." Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence watching their children, watching the life they'd built from desperation and despair and unlikely love. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined. It wasn't the world they'd wanted, but it was theirs, built with their own hands from whatever materials they could find, and that made it precious. Tarek looked over and caught his father's eye. He smiled, a smile that carried hope and strength and the determination to make things better. Kylor smiled back, feeling the weight of years and struggle and loss, but also feeling something else, peace. Not the peace of having won, but the peace of having endured, of having loved and been loved, of having built something that would outlast them both. As the sun set over the reservation, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kylor closed his eyes and let himself feel everything, the grief for what was lost, the gratitude for what remained, the love that had sustained him through the darkest times. He thought of Naira, his first wife, who'd given him Tarek and paid with her life. He thought of the warriors who'd died fighting, who'd chosen honor over survival. He thought of the long journey that had brought him from the mountains to this flat, dusty place. And he thought of Elena, the enemy who'd become his savior, his partner, his love. The woman who'd taught him that strength wasn't just about fighting, but about enduring. That courage wasn't just facing death, but choosing life even when life was hard. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked, lifting her head to look at him. Kylor opened his eyes and looked at her. This woman who'd saved his son, who'd saved him, who'd built a family from the ruins of 2 destroyed lives. "I am thinking," he said slowly, "that the world is cruel and unfair and broken, but that people, if they choose, can create small pockets of light in the darkness, small places where love survives, where families thrive, where the future is possible." Elena's eyes shimmered with tears. "And do you think we created that? Here, in this place?" Kylor looked at their children, at the small house they'd built, at the community that had formed around them despite everything trying to tear them apart. "Yes," he said, "I think we did." Elena kissed him, soft and gentle, and then rested her head on his shoulder again. Around them the evening deepened, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Tarek called out to them, asking if they wanted to join the family for dinner. Kylor stood, helping Elena to her feet, and together they walked toward their children, toward the meal they'd share, toward the ordinary moments that made up a life. It wasn't the ending Kylor had imagined when he'd been a young warrior fighting for his people's freedom. It wasn't glorious or heroic, but it was real. And it was enough, because in the end, survival wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to be broken. It was about finding love in unexpected places and holding on to it with everything you had. It was about building something, anything, that would outlast the forces trying to destroy you. And in that small house on the reservation, with the woman he loved and the family they'd built together, Kylor had done exactly that. He'd survived. They'd survived. And from the ashes of 2 destroyed worlds, they'd created something new, something that was neither fully Apache nor fully white,
but something unique and precious and worth protecting. As they sat down to dinner, the children talking and laughing around the table, Kalor caught Elena's eye and saw his own thoughts reflected back at him. This was what victory looked like, not triumph, but endurance, not conquest, but love. And it was more than enough. Years later, when Kalor was old and his body had grown frail, he would sit on that same porch and watch his grandchildren play in the dust. Tarek had married, had children of his own, was teaching at the school and fighting for reforms just as Elena had done. Naira had become a healer, learning both traditional medicine and the white man's ways. Samuel was working as a translator, an advocate, bridging the gap between cultures just as his parents had done. The reservation was still difficult, still unjust, but it was better than it had been. And it would continue to get better, slowly, painfully, because people like Tarek and Naira and Samuel refused to give up. On a warm afternoon in late spring, when the cottonwoods were in bloom and the air was sweet, Elena came to sit beside Kalor on the porch. She moved slowly now, her joints stiff with age, but her eyes were still sharp, still full of fire. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing this instead of fighting?" Kalor thought about it, really thought about it. He thought about Rovan and the others who'd died fighting. He thought about the life he'd imagined for himself as a young man, free and fierce and uncompromising. He thought about all the compromises he'd made, all the indignities he'd endured, all the ways he'd bent without breaking. "No," he said finally, "I do not regret it. Because this," he gestured to their children, their grandchildren, the life they'd built. "This was worth every moment of pain, every humiliation, every loss. This was worth surviving for." Elena took his hand, her grip still strong despite the age spots and wrinkled skin. "I love you, you know. After all these years, I still love you." "I know," Kalor said, smiling. "And I love you. You saved me, Elena. Saved my son, saved my soul. I owe you everything." "You owe me nothing," Elena said firmly. "We saved each other. That's how love works." Kalor pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid warmth of her presence. They sat like that as the sun moved across the sky, as their grandchildren played and laughed, as life continued its inevitable forward march. And when Kalor closed his eyes and let himself rest, he felt no fear, because he knew that what they'd built together would continue long after they were gone. Their children would carry it forward, and their children's children. And on, ripples spreading across time, proof that love could survive anything, even hatred, even war, even the end of the world as you knew it. That was the lesson, Kalor realized. That was what they'd learned through all the pain and struggle and loss. That the human heart, when it refuses to harden, when it chooses connection over isolation, love over hate, survival over pride, that heart can create miracles. Not the loud, obvious miracles of victory and triumph, but the quiet miracles of endurance, of families staying together, of cultures surviving, of love finding a way even when everything says it's impossible. As the sun set on another day, painting the reservation in shades of amber and rose, Kalor opened his eyes one last time and looked at the life around him. His wife, his children and grandchildren, the community they'd helped build, the future they'd made possible. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was real, and it was theirs. And it was built on the foundation of two broken people who'd chosen to heal each other instead of destroying each other. And that, Kalor knew with absolute certainty, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.